What hobby makes you immediately think this person grew up rich? My uncle, who was never super rich, worked in the family business, bought a farm and ended up getting paid bank to let a company mine a portion of it. He owns several airplanes and is working on getting his helicopter license. The rest of us are like ... not wealthy. But that's his only splurge. He drives the junkiest car around and still works with my dad, pap, and uncle. Yeah, it's not too bad, but still quite expensive as a just because hobby. The ground school isn't terrible, honestly. It's a few $100s online or closer to $1,000 in person. You need at least 40 hours flight time. Most people average closer to 55-60. Half, or more, of that time is going to be with an instructor at an hourly rate. Plus you need to pay for plane rental plus fuel. Typically it's around $110–124 per hour, depends on market and fuel costs. So let's estimate $1K for ground, $6K for plane, and probably 20 hours of instruction at $45 per hour. $900, that comes out around $7,900. I'd round up closer to $10,000 for a private pilot's certificate. It's not Richie Rich status, but it's definitely above most folks' reach. My cousin, poor, bought 4 Banksies for a total of $750 that is now worth over 6 figures. He thought they were cool and he lived in an area where Banksies started. He has the kid with the kite and I forgot the other one, but 2 of each. Hasn't bought another piece of art and is selling 1 of each this year. It's his retirement. His dad was super jealous and spent all his retirement, maybe $140K max, trying to hit on something and is now broke. Years ago, I worked for Wrigley, gum company now owned by Mars, when it was still owned by the Wrigley family and William Wrigley Jr. was the CEO. My second day, I ran into Mr. Wrigley in the elevator but didn't know who he was. During our small talk, it came out that I trained BJJ, still very new in the US till 20 seconds ago, and I ended up asking him what sports he played. His response: "Oh, I play a little pickup polo from time to time." I can't even imagine how the hell a pickup game of polo might materialize. I can't imagine a dozen or so billionaires out riding their favorite polo horse and just happen to run into one another at the park. Yep, I went to the Santa Barbara Polo Club a few times for polo. They tie the horses up before the game for everyone to inspect. The horses are amped, they know what's coming and they are excited as hell. It's a trip. My daughter used to ride competitively, not polo, but English and Western, with the daughter of a friend of ours. The friend had a BF that played polo. Just doing that, a word of caution: if you want to do horse anything competitively, it's easier just to set fire to piles of money. A good friend of mine, his daughter got a scholarship to our alma mater for equine sports. Trust me, it's cheaper to not have the scholarship and to just pay for college. But it's cool as hell, grant you that. Training might be a bit of an exaggeration in this case. Basically, I had 2 roommates. I don't want to use their names without permission, and even then, I'd rather not make doxing me too easy. These 2 roommates had a hustle that took them between Chicago and California regularly, with them spending more time in California than Chicago. They would train with one of the Machado brothers, fairly certain it was Jean-Jacques. When in California, they had gotten turned into BJJ through someone they knew through their judo school. Anyway, When they came back to Chicago, they started sharing some of what they learned with me. Within a few months, we had 4 or 5 guys who would meet in the basement of our rented house to learn that ultimate fighter shit, as one of the 5 so eloquently put it. When I moved out of that house, I sorta just slowly tapered off my involvement. Falling in love can do that. From what I heard back then, one of them mentioned to Machado what they were doing and he was less than supportive and told them they could stop teaching in Chicago or they could stop training under him in California. I had little to do with BJJ for years after that, and it wasn't until a few years ago that I started real training. At my gym, I joke that I've been training for 20 octoseconds and still suck this bad. Dude, this all the way. People think just horse riding is expensive. Really isn't that bad if you don't own a horse. It's owning a horse where it gets expensive. Imagine needing 4 or 5 well-trained horses to compete in a single game. And those horses need people to care for them, work them, and tack them up during the event. All that means you're spending a lot of money on what is essentially soccer or hockey on horseback. That shit is expensive. I had a 500-pound twin-engine go-kart that I ripped around the track every so often, but we go in cheap. Free as a mate did some work there. You see these kids rock up that probably would rather be somewhere else with these overbearing fathers who are trying to live their dreams through the kids, screaming at them for just having fun and not knocking a thou off their lap time. The setups, the gear and even the vehicles they transport their carts in are stupid money. We used to take their tires as they would one race and bin them, but they still go for ages just fine for us. Recreationally, if you just want to do it as a fun day out and hire, it's still expensive. You see these kids rock up that probably would rather be somewhere else with these overbearing fathers who are trying to live their dreams through the kids, screaming at them for just having fun and not knocking a thou off their lap time. The setups, the gear and even the vehicles they transport their carts in are stupid money. Change a few nouns and you have just described pretty much any youth sport. Source: I coach a 10U tournament baseball team. And to be fair, most of the kids at that level genuinely want to be there, but I can point you to at least 2 kids on my team that are there to make mom and dad happy, and for no other reason. These are also the kids with the most expensive gear and sub 100 batting averages. Timmy's not going to become an all-star hitter with that $350 bat if he dives out of the box on any pitch that looks like it might be a little inside. That was my exact experience with golf. Loved the sport casually when I was young. I enjoyed the tournament the local course ran. It was basically a summer camp with prizes for the best golfers, and my parents assumed that I wanted to play competitively. I got a set of very nice clubs and was enrolled in a bunch of golf leagues that were pretty competitive, and it'd be shit like we'd drive 2 hours to a course where I'd play 18, then spend hours waiting for everyone else to come in to see the scores. It was all very competitive and I hated it. I just wanted to drive 15 minutes and play a casual 9 with my grandpa. It slowly killed my enjoyment of the game to the point that until this summer the last round I played was almost 8 years ago. Growing to enjoy the sport again, but playing competitively really killed my love of the game so much. Anything that doesn't match the climate of where they grew up. If they grew up in the desert but they're ace skiers, then I assume they had the money to travel a lot and own all the gear, etc. Edit. I should clarify my statements are based on my experience in Australia. I was unaware that Yank geography had so many places you could ski close to deserts. In Australia there are only about 2 places you can do it, and it's super expensive. It was much cheaper in Europe, which is why I learned there, but growing up, the only people I knew who did it regularly were super rich. My fiancé was telling me a story about the exchange students that lived with them and how they were so nice and would help take care of the house. I asked her why her exchange students stayed with them for so long, when all my high school exchange student friends had only stayed for a semester. It was at that moment she realized that she grew up with Swiss nannies. My sibling has 2 kids, works, and a spouse that works. They compared pricing of daycare versus getting an au pair, in the form of a foreign college student. Now, I don't know offhand if the au pair was cheaper, or how much more expensive, but I do know that's the option they went with because it made more economic sense. Not like they live in New York City, LA, or anything like that either. They're semi-rural in a Midwest state. That having a whole-ass person live with you to help with the kids is economically comparable to dropping your kid off at a daycare is bonkers. You don't actually pay the au pair much. I think you do room and board, some fees, and then the cultural exchange aspect means the au pair has time off to experience the culture or whatever. Probably very hit or miss depending on who you get, but probably not a bad option if you have older kids versus dealing with school before and after care or something. I had an au pair when my kids were under 5, that's when daycare is most expensive. And you're right, what you pay is fairly low because they are exchange students and they have other experiences outside of the family. This is a well-regulated occupation. We loved our au pair and are still in touch 20 years later. It goes both ways though. This person is leaving their home and moving to a new country, even if only for a year or less, to a brand new family they know nothing about. They do not know the family dynamic there or how the husband or wife acts. They are going to have to take care of children that could be little bastards for all they know. It is scary on both ends. We looked into this too, and the reason is the marginal cost per kid is 0, whereas at daycare it's paying for the entire second kid. That's where the economics gets into play. It would have been $250/kid/week at daycare, or $500 per week total for $24K at a relatively cheap daycare, plus driving and everything else. An au pair is typically $200-250/W plus about $10K per year program fee for a total of $20K-23K, versus $26K. Plus you need to have a room in your house dedicated. So for 2 kids it's a little less than break even, for 3 kids it's way cheaper, and you have to imagine the stress of illness, driving to and from. You can dictate what the kid does and learns, etc. Honestly, the fact is, we are in a society where paying other humans to do anything is ludicrously expensive, mostly because we have no safety net, so when you start paying for anyone, especially a citizen non-student who is not subsidized or anything, you have to imagine your fee going to pay for the health and other insurance, eventual retirement, transportation, etc. It's why even if you have like an engineering salary, you pay people more than you earn per hour to do even non-technical labor, like cleaning or painting or whatever, with the understanding that things like plumbing, electrician, those should probably cost money due to the education and skill requirements. The math for us at 2 kids was basically that we could remodel the basement so our au pair has a room, and after a year we'd come out ahead relative to daycare for 2 kids, plus the pandemic happened and we were some of the only parents we know who still had regular help with the kids. It's saved us a ton of money. And our au pair has been amazing. She stayed on a 2nd year and got engaged to an American here, so she's going to stay in the US after she maxes out her time in the program. Prob will stay on with us as a permanent nanny too. This is basically my grandmother. She's always been a free spirit kind of person, which I respect immensely. But this also means she owns and loves her horses and will remain poor while keeping them, to say nothing of her need to own no less than 4 dogs at any given time. At one point she even lived in the attic above the stable. I didn't know if I loved that or pitied her for it. That being said, she taught me how to ride and that was lots of fun. Wish I could do that more often. She seems to love taking care of her horses and doesn't regret it at all, so I say more power to her. Yup, I was hired to take care of this rich family's 6 horses who lived in the most beautiful barn I have ever seen. No one rode the horses or even came to see them. The wife liked to see them from her window. It was ridiculous, but they paid me pretty well for barn work and the job was ridiculously easy. They still have them. I'm sure they will keep them until they pass naturally. These horses live a better life than most people. They get great medical care and are fed very well. The few of us who work at there love them a ton, so we always spent time with them aside from just doing our job. As a diver, I can firmly say our sport has 2 categories of divers. You have tons of rich asses who dive maybe once a year in some wonderful tropical location they flew to, but suck at the sport because they rarely ever practice. These are the kinds of folks who will show up with thousands of dollars worth of gear, but can't remember how to put it on. Conversely, there's also a big contingent of divers who are more working middle class, and who dive wherever the hell they can locally. They usually don't have the most modern gear, but they get a good amount of practice in whatever lake, river, pond, or other body of water they can access locally. It still isn't a cheap sport, but doing a few days of diving a year gets a lot less pricey when you're not flying to another country for it. As a fencer, yes, for the most part. My club had a financial aid application, but those aren't common. All clubs do loan gear, but having your own is much better. The upkeep is also another problem since gear breaks down. I guess to lower the cost, I try to do some repairs myself, but I don't have all the tools to do that. Unfortunately, I didn't grow up rich and got started through my public high school's team. When I decided I wanted to get into it more, the prices weren't great. I didn't know fencing was considered a rich sport until recently. Fenced for a few years despite being extremely working class. My HS hosted a club and we paid £20 a month to go once a week, borrowed gear from the club every week. It was a blast. Although I was never a competition fencer, just trained at the club and had a few duels between club members, so maybe that's why I never saw it as rich sport. Growing up, my school system had a random week-long break in February. One of my friends was rich and would go to Disney World every year. My now husband got to go with them. He was closer with this friend. My in-laws tried to insist on him staying home because they couldn't afford to pay his share, but the friend's mom insisted that she had no problem covering everything. They flew there, stayed in a Disney hotel, and not the cheapest one, and spent multiple days at the park. Really nice family, just had lots of cash. My husband mentioned to this friend a few years back that we had taken our foster daughter on vacation to Mackinac Island, in Michigan, and he was like, "Oh, did you stay at the Grand Hotel?" Number. That's a 4-star hotel on the island that was featured in the movie Somewhere in Time. We stayed at a family-friendly hotel off the island that we could afford on the salaries of a high school teacher and a graduate student.